Class is now in session. I am Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing Game 1 of the regular season for the San Jose Sharks as they took on the St. Louis Blues and lost by a score of 5-4 in overtime. And you know, as they say, the more things change, the more they stay the same. The San Jose Sharks came into this season with a new look to the team, multiple young players added, free agents, trades, all of that to try and give this team a bit of a different makeup heading into this season compared to last. Not in terms of trying to win a lot more games, not many people are expecting that, but in terms of trying to avoid the same pitfalls that they had fallen into multiple times last year. Well, coming into this one, they were up 4-1, 3-goal lead heading into the third period before they would give up 3 unanswered, and then the overtime game winner. A game it looked like that they would manage to claim 2 points out of, only ends up leaving with 1. So indeed, bringing some Sharks fans a little bit back down to earth after what was a very, very thunderous start to the first 40 minutes of this season. And against a team who the Sharks actually had a lot of success against last year with a 3-0 season record. So a bit of revenge for the St. Louis Blues and the San Jose Sharks. You know, it was fun. This is maybe what we're going to be expecting a lot of this season, some more fun games, even if the Sharks do come out on the bottom. But the way it actually played out is definitely going to leave a little bit of a bitter taste in a lot of people's mouths. Now, when it comes to how this game played out, we have the first period here, which is a bit of a quirk in the NHL scheduling, not as though this is a unique situation. Multiple teams go through it, and it feels as though this happens every single year, but it's something that is still worth being mentioning. You know, the Sharks, they're playing their first game of the season. They haven't played an actual regular season hockey game in many, many months, since like the middle of April, a long time ago at this point. Meanwhile, the St. Louis Blues made their debut this season just a couple of days ago against the Seattle Kraken. So it really wasn't that much of a surprise that the Blues come out here with a lot more energy in the first period than the Sharks actually did. The Sharks still trying to find their legs to play in a regular season game. The Blues already used to that from their first outing. So the Blues pile on 22 shots in the first period, but the Sharks are the team who actually have the lead after it with the first career goal of Macklin Celebrini. The game then gets tied by Buchnevich on a similar goal just a couple of minutes later, and then Toffoli with his first goal as a San Jose Shark to make it a 2-1 lead for them at the end of the first. In the second period, it would be 2 special teams goals, one from Zetterlund on the power play, the other from Barclay Goodrow shorthanded, and so it is a 4-1 lead carried into that final frame. And like I said, it seems as though the Sharks, there was a lot of energy here in the building as well, this being the home opener. It felt as though they'd be able to close this one out, but 2 pretty quick goals from the Blues, from Faksa and Suter, to bring this to within 1, and then with the goaltender pulled, it is Justin Falk who ties it up, and then eventually a Braden Shen overtime game winner. So the Sharks, they only claim the 1 point in the standings. Certainly a disappointing finish to a strong start. Now, when we get into talking about the players for here tonight, obviously the big name here on the first line is Macklin Celebrini, but I'm actually not going to start with him because I instead actually want to focus with something that I usually talk about at the end of the video, but it's of very high importance with what happened here tonight, and that is goaltender Mackenzie Blackwood. Now, through the preseason, we knew that it would be Blackwood versus Vanacek who would get the first start of the season for the Sharks because Askarov was injured for the majority of that preseason, so he was kind of out of the conversation at that point. And through the preseason, it seemed as though Vanacek was getting the better of the starts. Blackwood not looking completely set in his own goal. However, perhaps because of the fact that he has that longevity here, he was here for the entirety of last season compared to Vanacek, who hasn't yet played a regular season game for the Sharks, he is given game number 1. And it was a very weird game for Blackwood because you could certainly look at it in a positive light and see that there were a lot of big saves that he managed to make. Like I had mentioned, the Blues had 22 shots in that first period, and the Sharks only gave up this singular goal. And so one would think that Blackwood looked rather solid in that, and you could maybe make like a mini highlight reel of some of the bigger saves he made in this game. But when you take a look at the goals that he did let up, it was not pretty at all. Of the 5 goals here, the only one that you could maybe excuse Blackwood on would be the first one from Buchnevich, because it is a bit of an awkward bounce catching Blackwood moving the other side. But every single other goal scored here are ones that just beat Blackwood quite cleanly. The Faksa one's on a bit of a jam play, so maybe you could make an excuse, but you probably shouldn't have a hole there. But you take a look at Falk, you take a look at Suter, you take a look at Shen. These are all ones where there's not really that much traffic in front. This is one that Blackwood should be able to locate, and yet he gets beat cleanly on all 3 times. And so it's hard at this point to really say that Blackwood actually had all that great of a game, even with some of the bigger saves that he made, because the Sharks, of course, you don't want to be playing in your own zone as much as they were in the third period, but it is inevitable when you have such a large lead in the game that the other team is going to come out, score effects come into play, and the other team is going to get a lot of shots, and I thought the Sharks did an okay enough job at trying to keep those things to the perimeter, and yet it's on a bad giveaway by Henry Thrun that leads to this Suter chance, but Blackwood could have made a save there. Falk here is coming in right off the boards there, pretty high up, not a ton of traffic, beats him clean, and then of course a 2-on-1 type of situation, but if the shot is coming, Blackwood, you're hoping maybe for the save, and it never quite actually ended up happening. So a rather disappointing game for sure from Mackenzie Blackwood. You really wanted that extra save, and the Sharks just didn't quite get that from him, so I imagine the next start will end up heading to Vanecek, and we'll see if he can do a bit better. Now moving on to the forward lines, indeed, we will now talk about Macklin Celebrini, who obviously had an incredible start to this game. Not only does he manage to get the first goal here, which was one of the fastest goals for a first overall player in their NHL debut, but he also manages to add another assist in that first period, a beautiful one to Tyler Toffoli. So already 20 minutes in the books, Macklin Celebrini was up at 2 points, and you can definitely see, we saw in the preseason there was a lot of very promising talent there, but of course you say, well, it's just the preseason. What are we actually going to see in the regular season? Well, it's quite clear from Celebrini that he is showing that he belongs here in the NHL. A very, very nice game, very, very well played game from him, and that skill level is just at such a high point. Usually when you see these players going for these behind the back, spinorama type of passes, you're thinking, oh, just simplify your game, make the simple play, don't try and be a little too fancy with it because you're going to end up giving the puck away. And sure, there were a couple of moments in which Celebrini did indeed end up getting a little bit punished for what he was trying to force through. So many of those moves actually ended up reaching their target, actually ended up working out. Celebrini is just that good to be able to work them through. Now, as this game wore on in the second and in the third period, it kind of faded a little bit into the background. Obviously, didn't have that same big offensive moments as he did in the first period, but he was still one of the Sharks' better forwards here tonight from an offensive perspective. There's work to be done defensively for sure. I wasn't 100% appreciative of his effort in the overtime play that actually led to the 2-on-1 goal for Brayden Schenn, but all in all, I think this was a really solid debut game for sure for Celebrini. When it comes to his two line mates, we'll start off with Tyler Toffoli, because he was such a little bit of a frustrating player through the preseason. Came in, expected to be a scorer here, and he scores here tonight. There's not really any arguments about that, but he's a very, very consistent player, and exactly what you're expecting from him is what you're actually going to get, and I was hopeful that after the preseason he'd be able to raise his level of play heading into the regular season, and I think he did that at least to a certain extent, maybe not as highly as I would have hoped for, but there's definitely a lot of talent here for Toffoli. I think he works rather well with Celebrini. As we saw, Toffoli has a innate ability to be able to play in the open ice and actually be able to get open for these passes that both Eklund and Celebrini are going to feed towards him. And so I think this is a really good line setup from Ryan Warsofsky. Toffoli, a decent game, but it is slightly frustrating that you're maybe hoping for a little bit more, and you're probably left kind of wanting a bit because you're not really going to end up getting that. And then when it comes to his line mate, William Eklund, I thought there was a lot of energy here for Eklund. You could definitely tell he was very jazzed up for being able to play with a player like Macklin Celebrini. They already seem to be developing a bit of chemistry there, with the excitement from Eklund shown when Celebrini actually scored that first goal, because it was kind of unknown that he got it, because he was unsure since he kind of behind the back passed it in a win off of a St. Louis Blues skate, but you could see just how excited Eklund was for Celebrini in that moment. So some good chemistry developing on this first line. I think this is a good first step that they have taken. It was a solid enough game for William Eklund, I would say. Defensively, I think there's a little bit of work to be done here, but he was relied on very heavily as this game wore on in those last few minutes. He was given the tough defensive zone shifts, and it's hard to necessarily put a ton of blame on him for the fact that the Blues were actually able to come back. Like I said, maybe the goaltender could have bailed them out a little bit more. When it comes to the second line, this is where there were definitely some growing pains for sure. We'll start off, of course, with Will Smith. His preseason has been not spectacular, I guess, to say the least. He played 3 games in that preseason, if I'm not mistaken. All 3 of them were just kind of mediocre at best. But of course, the Sharks wanted to put him into a position to succeed, not trying to be too discouraged by what they had seen in the preseason. Put him up with Granlund, with Zetterlund, 2 of the Sharks' better forwards that they have. And well, the delivery in this game is is honestly not great. I don't think Smith was terrible, for sure. I thought he had like an okay game, but it reminds me a lot of the times when William Eklund was originally making his debut in the NHL a few years ago, because it's just quite clear that the skill is there. When Smith was given the chance, either when like the Blues would give it away to him or where he would just have a little bit more space to actually work with, there were some very slick passes that he was able to get away there with, a couple of good shots as well. I mean, good shot positions, not necessarily good shots taken from him. But the fact is like with Eklund those few years ago, he needs to learn to play with a little bit more pace. He has to realize that the game is being played at a significantly higher speed than what he is used to, and to be able to quickly be able to dish the puck out or get his feet moving to actually make something happen, because a lot of the times he's running out of space and he's not making the correct play because of that. He's just getting a little bit too pressured. So it was something that took Eklund a couple of seasons of work in the SHL and the AHL to really get it going, and we saw last season when Eklund truly arrived here, his first full season in the NHL, that now he is playing with that pace. Smith is just not quite there yet. I imagine he'll still be given at least a couple more games in the regular season to try and get a bit more up to speed, or just to be given the opportunity to get a bit more up to speed. But I would not be surprised at this point at all if at some point, maybe by like the end of October, he ends up getting sent back down to the San Jose Barracuda, unless some dramatic change happens in his game, because right now it feels as though he could use that extra bit of seasoning. When it comes to his two line mates, Granlund a little bit slow to start this game, not that much of a surprise. He was already kind of slow to start last season for the Sharks, and as we know, he would eventually end up being the leading scorer for the team. But on top of that, Granlund didn't really get to play much in the preseason. He had an early game, but didn't get much after that because of the fact that he was actually injured. So I wasn't expecting the best of the best plays from him. Plus, playing with two guys who struggled at times through the preseason in both Smith and Zetterlund, it was going to be tough to really pull this line together, and that's kind of what ends up happening. I'm not too worried for Mikael Granlund, but it wasn't the best of game for him. And then when it comes to Fabian Zetterlund, nice to see him actually be able to contribute on the power play off of a nice pass actually from the aforementioned Mikael Granlund. It was just at even strength, not a ton doing with this second line. Then we get to the Sharks' bottom six, where I do want to comment on the bit of a weird lineup choice. You know, I talked about Warsofsky putting Eklund, Celebrini, and Toffoli together. I thought was a really, really smart move. But the choices here in the bottom six, a little bit suspect. Having Gushin on this fourth line, playing with Sturm and Dellandrea, and then having Wenberg with Cunnin and Goodrow, feels like an odd choice. Not necessarily to say because I think Cunnin, Wenberg, and Goodrow is a very bad line. You know, they were rather solid in that final game of the preseason against the Vegas Golden Knights, and they again here tonight were actually pretty good. But the thing is that you bring in a player like Alex Wenberg, you're paying him a lot of money, $5 million. You're not paying him $5 million to just be some defensive forward on the third line. That is a massive overpayment for the type of player you're asking him to be. You also want him to bring that little bit of an offensive flair that he has. He could be a really strong third line center, not just defensively but also offensively. But then you surround him with two players that play in a very similar way and not in the types of way that actually complement Wenberg at all. And so when it came to this line, while they were rather solid defensively, and don't get me wrong, they didn't really get anything done from an offensive perspective at all. And this is because Wenberg doesn't really get to use the playmaking ability that he does have in his game when both Cunnin and Goodrow are kind of just go to the front of the net type of players and try to clean up the garbage there. There's no actual strong shooter on this line to benefit with what Wenberg might be setting up. So it feels as though there's a bit of a clash here. And then when you take a look on the fourth line, you see someone like Danil Gushin who could fit into that role rather well, who could be that shooter who benefits from what Wenberg's going to be doing, still gets shielded by the solid defensive play of a player like Wenberg. You don't necessarily have to staple him right next to Nico Sturm. It just feels as though that would be a lot more logical to have work out as a lineup trio. Just a quick swap, both Goodrow and Gushin, to make that work out. And it's kind of weird to me why Warsofsky didn't end up going in that direction. Now, like I said, this third line was rather solid here tonight. Luke Cunnin, I thought was another carryover strong game from the preseason. He was rather good. When it comes to Barclay Goodrow, he has that goal on the shorthanded play, which was really, really nice to see, being able to step up at the blue line, prevent the entry, and then stick with it, the relentlessness to be able to eventually get this shorthanded goal that put the Sharks up by 3 at that point. At even strength, I thought there were a couple of issues that Goodrow had, a few sort of bad giveaways in his own zone where he was looking for these passes right in front of the Blues net where nobody was actually there to receive it, and a couple of times it ended up transitioning to a really good chance for the St. Louis Blues the other way. So gotta need to sort of eliminate those kind of rookie mistakes, honestly, in his game there. And then Wennberg, like I said, defensively I thought he was relatively solid, but you're paying him $5 million to be able to bring both aspects of the game, and you're not really surrounding him with the talent for him to actually do so. And so offensively, this line didn't really get much generated at all. And then when it comes to the fourth line, we have, like I said, Gushchin with Sturm and Dellandrea. Another thing to add on about this Gushchin decision to have him on the fourth line, I've seen the sentiment out there that, well, you know, if he wants to actually prove that he belongs in the NHL, he should be able to find success with literally any line mates. And that's something that is sort of true. Like, there's a bit of a kernel of truth to that, but at the same time, you know, if you surround a player like Connor McDavid with fourth liners, he'll turn those fourth liners into 30-goal scorers. He's done it many times in the past in the earlier parts of his Edmonton Oilers career. But when you just take sort of players who are still good, but not elite, not great, not game breaker types of players, it helps a lot more when they're actually surrounded with good talent, and it helps them shine that much more. So I thought Gushchin played a good game. I thought he made a couple of nice moves on that actual goal that the Blues scored, the third one that they got. He had a really nice battle won in the neutral zone to get puck possession back for the Sharks. He works it back to his defenseman Henry Thrun, who then fumbles it completely, gives it away, and then the Blues scored, of course. But Gushchin made an original strong play in that situation, and while he wasn't as exciting and offensively successful as he was in the preseason here tonight on the fourth line, not getting a ton of minutes, as was kind of expected for a player being placed on the fourth line, I still thought it was all in all a pretty good game from him. After he took this high sticking penalty near the end of the third period, it seems as though Warsofsky was not particularly happy with that. I wouldn't blame Gushchin too much in this situation. It's certainly not the first time, nor will it be the last time that a player wildly swings their stick at an open puck to try and clear it out. Unfortunate that it kind of ends up bouncing off of the Blues player's stick and ending up in his face and ending up with a penalty call, but I don't really blame Gushchin that much for it. I'll be interested to see if he actually manages to maintain his spot in the lineup going into next game. Personally, I would obviously choose yes, and I'd put him on the third line to see if he could have that success, but it's also very possible, considering the Sharks were so convinced that they needed to keep 15 forwards on their starting roster here, that they might want to give another guy a chance, whether that be Grundstrom, Kostin, or even Giovanni Smith. When it comes to the other two players on this line, bit of an up and down. I thought Nico Sturm actually had a really strong, in particular his second period, where he was all over the ice, making some strong defensive plays and also being a decent enough offensive complement to Gushchin, not at the Alex Wennberg level that you would expect, but still okay for what you should expect to be getting out of someone like Nico Sturm. So I thought he had a pretty solid game. When it comes to Ty Dellandrea, a little bit more of a disappointment. He honestly didn't really do much. Defensively, he was just okay, but maybe not as good as one may have thought. And so, yeah, not the greatest game for him. When it comes to the defensive side of things, this is obviously a major issue for the San Jose Sharks throughout the entirety of last season. Their major issue, in fact, number one. This season, they made a couple of improvements here. How does it work out? Well, their top pairing of Walman and Ceci is entirely new, two players who were not with the team last year, and it was the Sharks' best pairing by far on the night. Cody Ceci was someone who really impressed me. I felt in the preseason he wasn't very good, kind of up and down, but for a player who was coming off of a Game 7 loss in the Stanley Cup Finals with the Edmonton Oilers to then come into a preseason, you're not expecting the best of the best efforts. In the regular season, he's definitely cleaned things up, and I thought he was one of the Sharks' better defensemen on the night. When it comes to Jake Walman, I was also impressed with his performance, another solid defenseman for the San Jose Sharks, and so the two new guys really kind of leading the way. However, like I sort of went on with about Walman during the preseason, offensively, there's still not a ton there, and it seems as though, of course, it's still only game one of the regular season, that it seems as though it's going to end up being yet another year where the defensemen at the blue line in the offensive zone are mostly just going to either be like sending it to their own defensive partner, rimming pucks along the board, or just taking like a random slap shot towards the net and hoping for the best in that situation. There's not a lot of plays being made at the Sharks blue line in the offensive zone by their defensemen, and I don't really see any of them actually being able able to pull that out unless Walman is able to improve in that area as the season goes on. When it comes to the next couple of defensive pairings, Ferraro and Ruda, it is definitely a drop-off from the first one. I wasn't super impressed with these guys. They had a couple of really good shifts, but then also a couple of really bad shifts as well. Ruda was a little bit unpredictable. It was interesting because Ruda was actually one of the Sharks' best defensemen through the preseason. Now he's kind of middle of the pack in this game, kind of falling down, a couple of gaffes with the puck as well, so not his best performance. Mario Ferraro kind of continues to exemplify exactly what Mario Ferraro does. He gets the puck in the defensive zone and then he wildly spins to try and clear it out, which either ends up getting kept in or it ends up being an icing. It's just generally not a lot of thought. It feels as though at times giving into what he's actually doing with the puck, just has like a one-track mind to be able to clear the puck out of the zone, and that's about it, which is not always a great thing. Sometimes you got to possess it a little bit more, but Ferraro does exactly what you're kind of expecting him to do. He lays the body, he gets the blocks. It wasn't a great game for Ferraro, but it wasn't the worst. And then when it comes to their third defensive pairing for the Sharks, we continue to go down the list because it was not a good game at all for this third pairing, and the definite spotlight is on Matt Benning, who had a major mistake. So did Thrun, of course, the giveaway on the Ryan Suter goal, but Benning just poor gap control on that one as well. And Benning, it's somewhat excusable considering the fact that he missed the majority of last season, so it's certainly an adjustment period having to get back to NHL speed. But I talked about back a couple weeks ago in whatever video that I mentioned, which was that the play time for both Marc-Edouard Vlasic and Shakir Mukhamadullin, who are both on the sidelines at this point, Mukhamadullin a little bit closer to return than Vlasic, but they're both on the sidelines with an injury, that their time in the NHL likely depends on how well or how poorly Matt Benning actually does in the lineup for the Sharks. And this was not a good first game from him, so if Shakir Mukhamadullin is actually to return relatively soon, he might be able to actually get a look here, because again, not a great game for Benning at all. And Thrun, honestly, while slightly better than Benning, I still wouldn't say was all that great for him. I was hopeful coming into this season Thrun would be able to work out some of those inconsistencies in his game. He had a lot of those issues last season. Here, game one, it's still early in the regular season, but not a very good start for him as it seems to have carried over. But that will do it for this review, as I have already talked about the Sharks goaltender. The Sharks will be back in action. They'll be back on Saturday for Game 2 of the regular season. Like I said, not the best start for the team. They were obviously hoping to finish this one out with a win, but they managed to put up 4 goals on net. There's some excitement there building with Macklin Celebrini, so it seems as though it should be a more fun season than last. Class dismissed.